Hi, it's Kiffin Lobates here, and today in this video I'm introducing a series of videos in which I look at a proof of concept that myself and Argans have produced as part of the ESSA-funded project Building Trust in the Digital Economy. In this video I want to introduce why we produced the proof of concept and what prior work was conducted before we set about actually coding it up. So the project split into two halves. There's a legal part, which was handled by the Queen Mary's Centre for Commercial Law Studies, and then there was a technical review part that Argans, myself, and Advisio worked on. And this series of videos focuses in particular on the technical relevancy of the project, not so much on the legal. So at the beginning, we conducted some surveys. We performed reviews of the literature, both from a legal and a technical perspective, and we held a workshop. And in the workshop, there were three aspects that were raised that were of concern to small to medium enterprises working in the Earth observation data space, in particular SMEs that are producing derived products from data that has been gathered by other entities. And in general, the SMEs were not particularly concerned immediately about the protection of intellectual property. It was an issue that they kind of kicked down the road because they had too many pressing issues to deal with at this moment in time. However, there was a general opinion voiced that if there was some way to handle intellectual property cheaply and efficiently, then they would be all for that. And three things were identified. One was a notarization service, the ability to register ownership of digital products in a quick and efficient manner. The second was a provenance chain, which is to be able to record how a derived product was actually derived, what the underlying data was, what processes were taking place, and how effectively the workflow of digital data from inputs to final output was conducted. And the third was legal licenses. It was expressed that it would be nice to have a set of simple template licenses that were used as standard in the industry, in the way that, for example, open source licenses in, for example, GitHub are presented in short, clear formats. So those were the three. Obviously, the third one is not relevant to us from a technical perspective, so I'll leave that up to my colleagues at the Centre for Commercial Law Studies. But we looked at the first two, notarization and provenance. And the conclusion that was reached was that given the volume of data that Earth observation produces, and in particular the sheer number of files that it generates, we are talking about millions upon millions of files, the existing blockchain notarization systems or other notarization systems out there are just not commercially viable. If you look at, for example, WIPO Proof, it costs 20 Swiss francs, which is about €5 in order to register a document. So clearly, if you own 10 million data files, registering those at a cost of 50 million euros is just prohibitively expensive. And similarly, when we went and looked at notarization services that use, for example, Bitcoin or Ethereum, they charge a similar rate, mainly because the transaction fees have become so high. Now, it is clear that if you're going to have a provenance chain, then you need to have clear ownership defined for all the components that are being worked with in order to derive the final product. And therefore, a notarization chain is a prerequisite for a provenance service. So given the scope of the project and the time frame, we decided to look at whether we could produce a proof of concept that would allow for the first point that was raised in the workshop, namely recording ownership of data. And the reason that recording ownership of data is of importance is because in intellectual property law, a lot of data that companies produce kind of falls between the cracks. It can't be copyrighted and it can't be patented. And there are some cases where for example, the EU sui generis database rules can apply, and there is some level of protection. But basically, most data is protected through the use of contracts, terms and conditions. And therefore, at some point in the future, if there is litigation because those terms and conditions have been breached, one of the things that the plaintiff is going to need to prove is that they are actual owners of the data. And to do that, having some kind of public record that shows that they had the data in their possession at a certain date, which is the earliest date known for that data, would form good hard evidence that would be of significant value in constructing a legal case. So that's the legalese out the way. In the next videos, I'm going to be looking at the technical implementation of the proof of concept, how it works, why it works, and what its relevance is. So move on to the next video now.